Yeah, so that's a great question. So, and I love to talk about this stuff. So I'll talk about it in two ways. So there's really kind of at the high level, what is fermentation, right? And this is how it's been used for millennia. Is you take baker's yeast, same yeast you use in brewing and bread making, and you provide it sugar, and it converts that sugar into carbon dioxide and alcohol, right? So the carbon dioxide is what we use to make things like bread rise, and the alcohol, of course, is used in beer and wine. And so the two ingredients are really sugar and yeast. And so on the yeast side, one of the most, I think, interesting things about biology is that, DNA is, in every living thing on the world. And, DNA is a string of letters of A, T, G's, and C's, and it's universal. And so, over the last, 100 years, people have gotten to the point where with DNA sequencing and some of the modern molecular genetic tools that are out there, that you can figure out from a plant or any other organism what pieces of that DNA sequence are responsible for allowing that organism to do the types of things that it does, right? And so the cool thing is you can identify those pieces of, let's say, a plant like the cannabis or hemp plant that make cannabinoids. You can take that piece of DNA and recode it so it will now work really well in a yeast cell, put it in that yeast cell, and now you can have the yeast cell starting to make that molecule the plant cell used to make. And again, it's being able to produce it in a higher purity kind of mechanism. So that's the yeast part. The fermentation part then is you take that yeast cell and you put it into a fermenter, which can range in anything from a small glass benchtop fermenter that we have several dozens of them in the labs, to full scale manufacturing fermenters, which are several stories high, right? And they're typically stainless steel tanks. And really all you're doing is you're mixing the yeast cell with sugar and nutrients that the yeast will need to grow, and providing them oxygen. And the yeast cell take up the oxygen, they take up the sugar, and they spit out, in our case, cannabinoids. And then it's a matter of then separating that cannabinoid from that fermentation broth using kind of classical downstream purification technologies to get highly pure, typically over 98 to 99% pure product at the end of the day, in typically somewhere around 7 to 14 days. So it's a fast process that's highly scalable and extremely well controlled. So it's a combination, again, of the yeast plus sugar in these large stainless steel tanks to be able to make these products. And as I said, these types of products have been made, for the last, call it 50 years. Almost everything that consumers are touching have some sort of fermentation derived product in it, whether it's, as I said before, amino acids or vitamins. A large number of them are made through fermentation processes. There's a number of different ingredients, from everything from flavors and fragrances that are made through fermentation. There are pharmaceutical ingredients like antibiotics and insulin that people know of. Some of the more modern uses of fermentation has been to produce things like, there's these molecules called human milk oligosaccharides, which are special sugar molecules that are only present in the mother's milk, that are thought to promote both cognitive development, so brain development, as well as kind of gut health and microbiome kind of colonization of the infants. And those are now being made by fermentation and are really important because formulas before this did not have those type of molecules in them. So there are ways to use fermentation to improve everyday health and wellness for all sorts of applications, from consumer products all the way up to pharmaceutical ingredients. Yep. So great questions. And so what I'd say there, I'll start there with are they the same? And the answer is absolutely they're the same. They're the same molecule, same structure, and they're actually made using the exact same chemistry and the exact same enzymes that are being used from the plant, right? And so from a molecular structure, they're identical. And so the second point, I'd actually start at a slightly higher level and say, what not just for cannabinoids, but any type of product, what do consumers and what do customers actually want, right? And that's where I think we start, and I think a lot of people try to start here, is, people really want products that are safe and efficacious, that are produced in ways that are socially responsible, sustainably, at high purity. And it all really gets down to, is this thing that I'm going to be putting into my body or on my body, is it pure? Is it safe? And is it going to do something that makes, is valuable to me? Does it make me feel better? Does it, make my skin look better? And those are all, I think, places where fermentation has a lot of advantages, right? So from, the aspect of purity, we can get things through fermentation extremely pure. Greater than 98% is kind of typical for the field, but oftentimes it's even higher purity than that. And that's because you're able to take, a single yeast culture that is extremely well controlled, where you have complete control of all of your inputs, and you're not, necessarily subject to the same whims as some of the agricultural produced products, where you have to deal with, changes in weather, where you're dealing with, pests like molds and fungus, and using fungicides or herbicides or pesticides. Those are things that we don't ever have to deal with. There are no pesticides in our process. There's no herbicides in our process. It's all just, high purity ingredients that come in, and you get high purity ingredients that come out. I think the other interesting part of this is that it's also, typically much more sustainable, except, using, tenfold or greater less both energy and land to generate kind of the same volume of material. And that's because we can basically, take, if you think about it, one of the cool things about yeast cells, one of the cool things about cannabinoids is actually from the plant. Most of the cannabinoids are in the flower, and they're in these structures called trichomes. And trichomes are just one of the most beautiful kind of structures that are out there in nature. And so they look like these long stalks with a bulbous head. And in that bulbous head, you can fit about 1,000 yeast cells in each one of those heads, right? So if each one of those yeast cells that you have in a fermenter, you just get so much more like productive material in that fermenter making your product, that you're able to make the same amount of product using a lot less land, a lot less energy, a lot less water, in a way that, is, I think, really important for both our customers and the consumer at the end of the day, to know that these things are being produced at such high purity, so responsibly, both towards the environment as well as socially responsible. It's just it's a win-win for both us and for the consumers at the end of the day.